Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to our first breaking news edition of the 1085 Gridiron here in the 2019 offseason. The New York Giants and the Cleveland Browns have made a trade. Not the one that we were all hoping for, but this seems to be a pretty solid trade for both sides. The New York Giants have traded pass rusher Olivier Vernon and picked 132 in the fourth round to the Cleveland Browns for right guard Kevin Zeitler and pick number 155 in the fifth round. This was a kind of a surprising move. It kind of means that they believe Austin Corbett's ready to take over at right guard, unless they decide to address that in free agency or the draft. To build a little bit of competition there. But when Corbett was selected last year, it was determined who'd probably be starting in a couple years or sooner. Jack, when you're looking at this trade, and we're also being joined by Stephen Thomas as well, but we'll get Jack in here first. Jack, when you're looking at this trade, what were your first impressions when this news came down?
Well, the first impressions were, and it goes back to a couple of days ago, I seen that the New York Giants were looking to trade Olivier Vernon, but they didn't have any takers because of the contract. I'm thinking the Browns are going after a pass rusher, and when Vernon's on the field, he's one of the best. And you look at all his numbers, and you go into the deep, analytical statistics, Vernon's one of the best, even though his basic stats don't show it. Then you see that Kevin Zeitler's the guy going back, and obviously for the last month or so, his name was floated around in trade rumors, including this week with the Beckham talk. Hate to see Zeitler go, but the Browns pretty much did what the Cleveland Indians didn't do, and that was trade a piece where they have some depth and used it to capitalize on a position of need on the roster, which the Indians didn't do with their starting pitching. Credit to Doug Maurice because he's the one that actually came up with that take first. But the Browns traded from their depth at the offensive line position and were able to address a need, and that was to add a quality pass rusher in Vernon.
Steven, looking at this trade, how do you look at it in terms of the offensive line? Because obviously they're going to ask Austin Corbett to live up to his second-round pick or second-round selection that he was last year, and they're going to ask Austin Corbett to step in. How do you think it really impacts the offensive line and asks them to kind of re-gel after they had so much success in the latter part of the 2018 season?
Well, I mean, I like the trade overall because Vernon last year he ranked I don't remember where 10th or 12th or somewhere, and it was pretty high up, and that was being the guy. He was the number one pass rusher over there. Now you're asking him to be the other guy. Miles is going to be drawing all the double teams and the left tackle, which is traditionally the stronger tackle from the other team, and Vernon's going to get a lot of one-on-ones. And there's a lot less pressure. There's a lot more opportunity as the other guy than there is as the guy. And I think he's going to thrive in that, especially when you throw Larry in the middle. And then we all think they're going to add at least one, probably two top-notch other interior pass rushers there. But from our side, you never like to give up a player like Kevin Zeitler. Just because you like the trade doesn't mean that you're glad Zeitler's gone or, he sucks or, in the Twitter age especially, it's such a one or the other thing that people make you try to believe you have to be. You don't like to give up Zeitler, but, if Corbett is, 80%, 90% of what Zeitler does, and apparently they believe that he can be, then, you've lost, $10 million in cap there because Vernon comes off after next year or the year after. I haven't really studied the contracts yet. But if you can do that and add to your pass rush, make a ferocious pass rush, I think it's a tremendous move to make, to be perfectly honest. Now, that all banks on Austin Corbett being the guy, or if they don't think he's the guy, this is a very strong interior offensive line class. A lot of people have talked about that. So, if they don't think he's the guy, they could go out and grab somebody in the second or third round and plug them in because all of the the draft folks out there have been talking about the center class and the guard class, and a lot of guys in this tackle class that they're talking about kicking inside. I mean, if you could grab, if things fall a certain way the rest of free agency and trades, and you could grab a Dalton Risner at the 49th pick and kick him in to guard, Risner would be incredibly nasty in that spot. So, I mean, I don't think they would do it if they didn't have full confidence in Austin Corbett or whoever they have, want to draft to be in there. So you don't like losing Zeitler, but I mean, I'm sure they took Baker Mayfield's opinion into account. I'm sure they talked to him. I'm sure, they weighed everything. And overall, I think the team got stronger with this trade as much as everybody likes Kevin Zeitler. So I don't see how it's not viewed as a positive thing, at least in the short term.
When you look at the offensive line as a whole, Steven, if you could say that Zeitler was probably above average in terms of being a right guard. If Austin Corbett is just average, how do you think that affects the whole line? Just that kind of little drop there.
I don't think I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal, and that's I think why they did it. If he's just average, as good as Zeitler was, he's approaching 30. We had been talking for a year, some people longer since he signed the contract, but for at least a year, we have been talking that after 2019, his contract they might move on from his contract. So maybe this is a year early, but you saw a chance to add a ferocious pass rusher to the other side, and you thought that the benefits outweighed the negatives. And I mean, I think that's the way you have to look at it. Let's say, Zeitler was, I don't know, would he grade out at 75 or something like that this year? Let's say Corbett comes in and grades out at 70. Yeah, it's a little bit less, but for the addition on the pass rush on the other side, the overall roster is much stronger. And again, I don't think they're done. I mean, I don't know if we're going to have any more offensive line moves, but this is the first of likely multiple moves between now and the end of the weekend, and then who knows what they're going to do in free agency. So I think if you can, as long as Corbett doesn't go, Cam Irving on us, I think it's a win.
At least Cam Irving in the beginning, because Cam Irving now actually isn't too terrible for the Kansas City Chiefs. Jack Duffin wrote on your website some of the salary cap I'm having a hard time saying the word.
Implications.
Yeah, that word. My God. You wrote about some of those on your website. So if you want to give us the details of how the salary cap is affected by this trade.
Yeah, I mean, Vernon, basically, once you add Zeitler's dead cap, which is $7.2 million because of the trade, Vernon's contract now becomes a 2-year, $19.1 million per year. That's on the annual average with the Browns now. Vernon's dead cap with the Giants was $8 million. He's scheduled to make $15.5 million this year and next. But and I think it'll be easier if this doesn't work out. He flops after this year. I think the Browns will be able to cut him, and they'll take a small dead cap hit next year. So for the Browns, obviously Zeitler, that dead cap is gonna hurt us a little bit, but in the end, I think with as much cap space as we have like 80. We had 81 million prior to the trade. I don't know how much we have now, but you can take chances like this, and it won't affect us long term financially.
Looks like we might have around 72 based on the difference in contracts now. So it costs you about $9 million to make this deal in cap space. Steven, kind of the underrated part of the deal, which you alluded to on Twitter, is that the Browns moved up 23 spots in the draft. They gave up their 5th round pick 155, and picked up pick 132 in the 4th round. Which they'll use pretty quickly there on day 3 of the draft. What's your takeaway from that part of the trade?
I love that part of the trade. I mean, everybody has been talking for a long time that the value in this draft is from about midday 2 through the 5th round. There's, 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. There's going to be lots of really good football players. So now we have 2/3, 2/4, and 2/5, and these are guys that, if you're looking at wide receiver, if you're looking at the middle of the tight end class, if you're looking at, the middle of the edge class to get a young guy to groom behind Vernon or something like that, there's a lot of options. And the other thing that it could be, the other possibility that it opens up is, I mean, we've all been talking in Browns Twitter. Anybody listening knows we've been talking about trading up for Ed Oliver for, months and months and months. And now you have an opportunity where if you want to, you could throw in, you could really go whole hog. You could throw in a third, a fourth, and a fifth to move up from 17 to wherever it is that you want, and still have a third, a fourth, and a fifth to attack the depth of this class like we just talked about. So, no, I'm not suggesting that they do that. That's, that might be overpaying. But my point is, you have a lot of options without hamstringing the rest of your draft class. So if they wanted to move up for an Ed Oliver, or I've seen some mocks where Quinnen Williams drops to 7 or 8, and if he's there beyond 5, I'm picking up the phone and offering a lot to go up and get Quinnen Williams, to be perfectly honest with you. I've seen Josh Allen fall in a few mocks. Maybe that, who knows, whoever they like. But it gives you a lot of options. And the worst, what's the worst case scenario? You can't make a deal. You stay at 17, you grab a very good football player, and then you can maybe move up from 49 or move up from 80, or just make all the picks and you make, add a bunch of really good football players. I like moving up, and I even like more the fact that we gave up our 5th, not even the Jacksonville 5th, which is 11 spots higher than ours. We swapped our 5th with them, which is, obviously Vernon and Zeitler are the headliners of this trade, but it's not something to be overlooked.
Most definitely, and we always, obviously, your name on Twitter is Browns Mock Draft. We always love to talk about drafts, and to gain, 23 spots from that 5th round to up in the 4th round, it should be interesting. Especially with who they were able to take last year in the 4th round, and Antonio Callaway, who's had quite the impact on the Browns' offense this season. So Dorsey did a good job last year hitting in those 4th and 5th rounds with players like Callaway and Jannard Avery. So it'll be interesting to see where in this draft Dorsey can strike and hit some of that depth in the draft. Jack, from the Vernon perspective, just what do you think he adds to this defensive line, and how does it affect the future of Emmanuel Ogbah?
Before I get to that, while we're recording, I just want to say the Browns just announced they have tendered Rashard Higgins,
yes,
Jermaine Whitehead, and Trevon Coley. So those guys all got Coley and Whitehead got exclusive rights free agents tenders, and Higgins obviously got a restricted tender. We just don't know what yet. So, but in terms of Olivier Vernon, the Browns, it was pretty much Myles Garrett in terms of pass rush. You had Jannard Avery, and, Jamie Collins had some success on that end, but Emmanuel Ogbah has not panned out so far as a 2nd-round pick. So you're adding Olivier Vernon, who's had at least 6.5 sacks in 6 out of his 7 years in the pros, take away his rookie year. And even if you just don't look at the sack numbers, he gets after the quarterback. 2015 in Miami, he had 36 QB hits. 2016, he had 23. 2018, playing in only 11 games, he had 21 QB hits. So this guy knows how to get after the quarterback. He's one of the best pass rushers in the league, like I alluded to earlier. And like Steven said earlier, he was pretty much having to be the number 1 guy in Miami or with the New York Giants. Now he gets to be the number 2 guy behind Myles Garrett, who's coming into his own and is proving to be one of the best young pass rushers in the league. So, you've seen people on Twitter talking about it. These two together on the defensive front, and then you add in Larry Ogunjobi and whoever else they're going to add in the interior, the Browns pass rush is shaping up to be very nasty for 2019 and perhaps 2020 and so on.
Steven, looking at Emmanuel Ogbah, you would think with this trade, in certain situations, you could have all 3 of them out there pass rushing the quarterback. You could kick Ogbah inside on 3rd downs for a little bit of extra pass rush. But where do you think this leaves him in terms of his long-term future with the Browns? Because he does need an extension after next season. So where do you think this leaves him?
Well, I think he'd be. I mean, we're still all hoping that he progresses into the pass rusher that we all thought he would be. Obviously, that would be the best thing for everybody. But it just hasn't happened thus far. And so, as depth, much like we just talked about with Vernon moving from number one guy to number two guy being an advantage, maybe being a depth piece helps Emmanuel Ogbah in the same way. Now, I think. We have all heard his name whispered in various trade rumors over the past couple of months. So I think there's a decent chance that he ends up on another roster before next year. He could be one of the moves that's made here in the coming days and weeks. But if he does stick here as the third option and moving in, he does give you versatility because he can slide inside. I think he played more than half of his snaps inside last year, and he can come out on the outside in certain packages. So much like we've all been talking about with the defensive backfield, if you got guys that can play multiple positions up front, it allows you to disguise what's going to happen from the defense much more than if you look out and you see, Ogbah's in, it's definitely a passing down. I mean, you don't know. I mean, he can do whatever. He can slide in, he can slide out. So I think as a depth piece, his value may go up, but I also think that he is one of the candidates, and I don't think I'm alone in thinking this, that might be moved here in the coming days and weeks. And just something that just passed here on Twitter, we've been looking at the linebacker market. Chargers just extended Denzel Perryman, so he's off the market. So just wanted to throw that in while we were live here.
To kind of drive home the depth point a little bit, last year Myles Garrett had over 1,000 snaps. He had 1,012 snaps. Larry Ogunjobi had 930 snaps. Jamie Collins had 1,067 snaps. So if you're able to cut Myles Garrett's snaps maybe by 20% by having Ogbah in there instead of him, that keeps Garrett a lot more fresh when it comes to crucial time in the fourth quarter. And same with Vernon as well. So if you could use Ogbah to spell both of those guys throughout the game, it could be extremely beneficial for the Browns defense just in terms of staying fresh throughout the entire game. The last thing we wanted to talk about here, last night we had a little bit of fun on Twitter, and to put it, Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network reported that the Pittsburgh Steelers traded Antonio Brown to the Buffalo Bills. First of all, that kind of freaked everybody out, kind of laughing, saying, that's what you get, Antonio, for speaking out and wanting a trade, getting sent to football's version of Siberia. And Antonio Brown commented on it saying fake news, which is a term that's thrown out a lot here over the last few years. And from there, Rappaport backtracked and said the two sides have had discussions, but nothing is imminent at this time. So it looks like Antonio Brown might not be headed to Buffalo to play with Josh Allen, and there were plenty of those jokes that went around last night as well. Steven, where do you think Antonio ends up, and what was your kind of takeaway from this nonsense that went out last night?
I don't know. I just love the theater of it all, and the fact that it happened and then didn't happen just made me giggle on a tremendous level, especially because it didn't affect us at all. But as far as where he ends up, at this point, it would be a random guess at this point because he has poisoned the well so much. Yeah, he's a great football player and he still produces at an extremely high level. But man, he's crazy lately. The last week or so is the only word you can use to describe the way his social media presence has been. And are you going to give up top assets for that? And if they're not getting top assets in return, are the Steelers going to give up on him? I think if you forced me to guess, if you pin me down and forced me to guess right now, I would think the PR spin is going to have to be sometimes brothers fight. We're a brotherhood. It's no big deal. And he ends up in Pittsburgh again next year, because I just don't think they're going to get the value for him that he would deserve. And if they dump him, it sets a bad precedent, not only for their franchise, which has, as much as we hate them, you got to admit they're a top-run franchise for the past 4 or 5 decades. They're run with class and smarts and everything else. It's part of the reason why I hate them so much. It sets a bad precedent not only for their franchise, but for the rest of the league, that if you go on social media and act like a wild man, we'll dump you for less than we should get. So I loved it last night just from a spectacle standpoint, but, I don't know what it says going forward for how things are going to be handled.
Jack, how do you think an Antonio Brown trade and the compensation that they might get could affect the value of, say, an Odell Beckham trade?
I think Beckham will definitely get more of a return just because he's younger. But if, say, for instance, Pittsburgh gets a 2 and a 4 back for Antonio Brown, I think that would justify the Giants for asking not only for 1 first-round pick, but they're obviously, it's been reported that they're asking for 2 first-round picks. So I don't know how much it would shake it up, essentially, because I think Beckham would definitely get more back in return. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that. I just think Beckham would definitely get more return just because he is younger and there's still more prime years ahead for Beckham. And also, Beckham's keeping his mouth shut and not demanding these things that Antonio Brown's been demanding through the media.
Well, you could say that Beckham's kind of been hinting at it with some of his social media posts, but not really throwing it out there and making it public per se. All right. As we get on out here.
When was the last time you could say Odell Beckham was the quieter of 2 people?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the level Antonio Brown has reached at this point. Odell is like being called the normal one at this point. So, and if we're going to touch on that, the rumors were rampant the last week. If we could somehow get out of it with only next year's first, I've been against the Odell trade because I think it's going to take 2 firsts. But if it could be, a 2 this year and next year's first, which, let's be honest, if they get Odell Beckham, has a really good chance of being 25 or higher, I could see that. I would not hate that deal in the least. You'd have to see the rest of the change, but if it's this year's second and next year's first, I got to tell you, I might pick up that check for Odell Beckham with Baker Mayfield.
And who knows, that pick in the first round next year could be pick number 32 if they were to get Odell. But we'll leave that for a different time. All right. As we get on out here, Steven, you want to go ahead and plug your social media and all that kind of stuff?
I'm just at Brown's Mock Draft, and I have way too much free time. So if you want to jump over there and follow me, I'd love to hear from you. Do the mock draft every day, and that's it, at Brown's Mock Draft.
All right, Jack, go ahead and plug your stuff.
Before I do that, Rashard Higgins, we said earlier, got tender as a restricted free agent. It's been announced through the media that it's an original round tender. So if the Browns let him go to another team, then don't match the offer sheet, the Browns will get a 5th-round pick back in return, which is kind of shocking. I thought he would get at least a 2nd-round tender.
Yeah, interesting.
But as always, follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle and check out my site, thenorthcoastsports.com. Jack Duffin from the Paul Brown International Browns podcast has been doing some Browns pieces for the site, and they've been a hit so far, positive and negative. But so go check those out, and also check out all the work that I do over there as well.
You can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter and Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. You can find our podcast on pretty much any platform imaginable, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and we would always ask you to subscribe, rate, and review it. And with that, most importantly, as we get on out of here, go Browns.